So for the next half hour, we're going to be talking about Secchi disk water transparency. Let me get going on that. And so what we see here is a Secchi disk. This black and white disk, essentially what we're doing is dropping it in the water and seeing how far we can see it. There's a bit more to it, but that's just keeping that in mind as I go through these beginning slides. And as you can see here, here's a happy individual taking it because it is a lot of fun. It is like taking the pulse of your lake. It tells you a lot, but not in, but it alludes to a lot more. And so this is our original parameter within the CLMP. So, oh yeah, a little bit more about myself. So I'm Erick Elgin, again, aquatic ecologist with MSU Extension and the CLMP Lake Program Manager. You'll be getting email reminders and tips and tricks from me throughout the summer season. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to take phone calls or emails. Joe and I will be talking about plants later, and if you're in the plant watch and you're needing help with identification, you can even text us the pictures, and if we're in signal, we might be able to answer you immediately. I've been working with lakes for most of my career now. I'm from Minnesota and started to do stuff over there where I began working on installing natural shorelines and then moving into aquatic plants and surveying them and understanding what the impacts of common carp and eutrophication are to aquatic plants. I then did a whole lot of things with rusty crayfish, Asian carp, more aquatic plants, getting to snorkel and enjoy and learn about our lakes by getting into the water. I then moved up to Canada and had a great time learning about food webs on a whole bunch of different lakes up there. And now here, what's great is I get to help with the research, the management, and the monitoring and the outreach associated with our lakes, because lake conservation is obviously about the ecosystem, but it's about all of us. It's about people. And I thoroughly enjoy my position now interacting with all of you. So Secchi disk water transparency is a measure of water clarity. Light is an essential component, and it's like a foundational component of any ecosystem, including lakes. How far light can penetrate into the water influences different zones. It influences what type of organism can live there. So for example, if light can penetrate all the way down to the sediment, that allows for rooted aquatic plants to grow. Think of your pondweeds and your milfoils and all those water celery, those great plants. And that's what we call in a lake the littoral zone. If you're in a deeper lake, as light penetrates through the water, it starts to get reflected, refracted, absorbed. And by the time you go deeper and deeper, there's no more light that can, there's not enough light there for photosynthesis to occur. So what's above that depth and the surface of the water is called the photic zone. So that's the chunk of water where photosynthesis can occur, and you get a bunch of algae that grow there. And again, algae may be seen as a bad term, but algae are the foundation of the food web in lakes. So what is a Secchi disk? A Secchi disk is a 8-inch round disk that is black and white. And in the CLMP program, we attach it to a tape measure, a long tape, and then you drop it into the water until you can't see it anymore. This is a standard parameter for collecting water clarity on lakes worldwide. It started in the 1800s when it was developed to measure the water clarity of the Mediterranean Sea, and now it is adopted worldwide in our inland lakes. So when we collect water clarity with the Secchi disk here, it can be now looked at in a European country, a South American country, for people who are studying inland lakes, and they can use our data to answer a question they may have. So you drop it into the water, and in clear water, it goes far. You can see it quite far into the water, and so therefore our Secchi disk is high. When there is stuff in the water, like algae, or suspended solids like sediment that's being kicked up or added into the lake, you won't be able to see it as far, and so your Secchi disk water transparency is lower. One other measure I want to throw in there that we don't often think about is some of you might live on tea-stained lakes or root beer lakes, and so they're stained. It's not that there's stuff floating in the water, it's just that the water has a lot of dissolved organic materials in it, and like a tea bag, when you put tea in the water and it becomes stained, it's not particles in there, it's dissolved in there, and that can reduce water clarity quite a bit as well. And so what does Secchi Transparency tell us? As I mentioned, it's kind of like the pulse of your lake. It can be an indicator of natural processes taking place, or it can be from human changes. So for example, if zebra mussels had invaded your lake and exploded in population, your lake would become more clear and the Secchi disk would pick that up. If there was lots of nutrients like phosphorus entering to your lake and that was creating algae blooms, your water clarity would go down and it could pick that up. And then also, so those are human caused issues that could be picked up, but it can also, our lakes are amazingly dynamic. And so even through a given year or through multiple years, you have natural processes that take place. So I'll show you in a future graph here, but the spring clear water phase is something that you can pick up when ice comes off on a lake and there's lots of mixing. There can be lower water clarity, but then overnight in some lakes, you might like go out on your dock and sip your coffee and look down in the water and it becomes crystal clear seemingly overnight. And that's caused by these little invertebrates called zooplankton that are filtering the algae out of the water so fast that they create this spring clear water phase. So that's a natural thing that our Secchi disks may pick up. And then just again, human cause. So here's a example of a tea-stained lake, so kind of like a root beer color. Here's an example of having a large amount of algae in the water body. And then here's just a picture to show that sometimes it's not algae that's creating a water clarity problem. It could be sediment coming in from an inlet or from erosion on the shoreline. So we ask in the CLMP to collect Secchi disk water transparency through the summer months, so from May through September. And so then you get a picture of what is happening with water clarity through time or through a given year in your lake. And so here is how we typically show our water clarity data. It's upside down, right? It looks a little different than a typical graph. And so what we have here on the vertical axis is the Secchi disk depth. 0 is on top. So think of it as the surface of the lake. I put this little boat here to indicate, like this person is on the top of the lake. And then as the disk goes down, so this bar goes down to, let's say, maybe 18 feet. So that is showing that the Secchi disk depth would be 18 feet. And then it changes in the different months as we go. We can also then take this data, and if you continue to collect in your lake, and we can look at water clarity through the seasons. So now here is the same kind of figure where you have time on the horizontal, and we have Secchi disk depth on the vertical. Oh, we need to have a label here on the axis. And we have 2020, we have 2021, and we have 2022. And as you can see, a similar pattern is here. So water clarity is highest in May, and then it kind of declines through the summer months. And we see that in all 3 seasons. And so that's pretty great. So now we're establishing a baseline for if something does happen, we can start to look at and understand what might be happening on the lake because of the data collection through time. Now, the data can be summarized to create other historical trends too. So now instead of looking at all of the different Secchi disks, we can average them for a given year. So averaging from May through September and creating just one number. And so, for example, in this lake, again, we have a horizontal axis of time, but now through many years. And then we have our Secchi disk depth here. And what we see in 1975, Secchi disk depth on average for this summer was 3 to 4 feet. Now through time, this was really this is like hyper-eutrophic, and the lake put a lot of effort into the management of the water body and reducing nutrients. And from the 80s, from the early 80s to the middle 80s, the lake changed dramatically. And it was picked up here with water clarity in showing that from 3 to 5 feet, now we were going over 10 feet on average through the years. And so by collecting data through time, we can start to understand if we're trying to manage a lake, or if a lake is becoming more developed, we can see, is the management working? Is the development starting to cause a problem on a lake or not? So let's get into the protocol. So what we're going to do now for the rest of this presentation is it is a fairly straightforward parameter, but there are some tips and tricks throughout, and we're just going to walk through our entire protocol. So as I mentioned, in our CLMP program, we ask you to collect Secchi disc water transparency in your lake from the middle of May through the middle of September. We ask that you try to evenly space it. It doesn't have to be perfectly spaced out, but collecting it every other Wednesday, for example. But it could be a Tuesday and a Wednesday here. It doesn't have to be perfect. And do that over the course of the season. We ask for at least 8 evenly-ish spaced measurements to be summarized. If you are only, life happens sometimes and you're only able to collect, let's say, 6 Secchi disc readings for the year, we would still like that data. We will still put it in our database, so it'll still be available to you and others through time. What we won't do is we won't average the numbers to get a summary for the lake for that year. But again, the data is still valuable, and we would still put it in our database. Why do we want to collect 8 measurements kind of spaced through the summer months? Is because lakes are quite dynamic and change through time. Here is a figure showing just what type of what algae do through the course of a hypothetical lake. And what we have here is the winter months, the spring months, the summer months, and then the fall months. And what we're seeing here is there are certain types of algae that bloom right after ice off. And then later in the spring, we have another group of algae called the diatoms, for example, that bloom. And then as the water warms, other algae like green algae, and then even later, cyanobacteria, also called blue-green algae, bloom. And so because of these changes through time, that's why we're collecting Secchi disc water transparency over the summer months, because we get a better idea of what is truly happening in a given lake. So many of our parameters are collected in the deepest part of the lake. We collect it in the deep part of the lake because that is a standard representative location for most lakes. If we collected a Secchi disc right off of your dock, that data is not helpful, and it's not as helpful because it would tell us what's happening on your shoreline. But the idea is that what we're trying to figure out is get a baseline understanding and baseline measurement for what is happening in the lake. And so that's why we go to the deepest location for Secchi disc, for summer phosphorus, for chlorophyll A, for dissolved oxygen and temperature. I think I got all of them. And the others are shoreline and aquatic plant parameters that go along the edges of the shoreline. So step 1. We drift your boat approximately over the deepest part of the lake. So what we don't want to do is to go to the deepest part of the lake, drop an anchor, and then collect Secchi. Dropping an anchor might create a sediment plume, and now we will not get an accurate measurement. And so if it is a bit windy, what you would do is, as you approach the deepest part of the lake, drop your anchor with extra rope, and then you'll drift in, and the anchor is now behind you. And then once you're stationary, collect that water clarity measurement. If it is a very stable, not windy day, you do not need to anchor if you don't want to. If your lake is really clear and there is a little bit of wind, you do want to be pretty stationary, because you can you can be pushed a little bit, and now your Secchi disk is actually trailing behind you, which would not give you an accurate measurement. So being stationary is very important for this. If you have questions about where is your deepest location, we give you that. So let's say you are Cedar Lake in Alcona County. Here is what we have as the deepest location, a latitude and longitude. We get this data from a variety of sources, from Michigan DNR lake maps. So you can also get these maps for your particular lake. So you could go into Google or a search engine and type in DNR lake maps, and you could find within your county your lake. Sometimes the DNR doesn't have your lake. You can check out another website called Navionics, Navionics. I think I got that right. Navionics. They might have something for you. And then if you can't find anything, feel free to contact me. Now, sometimes we have it wrong, as in just because like we might be off on where we think the deepest measurement is. And so please contact us and we will have that discussion with you, and we can have this potentially moved. But we'll have that discussion first. How do you get to this document? You go to MiCorps.net, lake monitoring, and then CLMP documents. Oh, and I should mention, each lake has a field ID that is unique to your lake. So there's lots of long lakes, right? There's lots of mud lakes, there's lots of round lakes. And so what we do is give a unique identifying number to each lake, and that's called your field ID. And that should be given to you in your enrollment. Some of your lakes are new, and so new to our entire system, and we will get those field IDs for you here in the next handful of weeks. Again, feel free to contact me if you need any clarification on your field ID. So step 2, on the shady side so you're now at the deepest part of the lake. On the shady side of the boat, slowly lower your disc into the water until it disappears. So slowly do it, look over, and you'll start seeing it kind of get harder and harder. But when it totally disappears, you cannot see it anymore, stop there and note the depth at which the disc disappears. And what I mean by measure, it's not from the top of your boat, but from the surface of the water, right? So from the surface of the water, what is that depth? And then just note it off to the side. Step 3, slowly raise the disc until you see it again. So we're like calibrating our eyes. So we've dropped it in until it disappears, noted that depth. Then we start to lift it up really slowly, and then it reappears. Note that depth. And then the official measurement is the average of those two numbers. And what we're doing is you record it you round it to the nearest half foot. So some of you may say, Erick, our eyes are so different. No way could we, is this accurate? Well, actually, there have been plenty of studies on Secchi disc depth to show that we as humans have pretty good eyes and fairly consistent. We cannot estimate to the nearest inch. So we're not accurate at that. But to the nearest half foot, we tend to be pretty close to each other. And so this measurement is a valuable measure. And that average number is the number that you put on the data sheet. And the data sheet you should have received from us, from Gene Roth. If you lose it or need another copy, as Joe mentioned, it is all on MiCorps.net. So just a couple of things to remember. Do not wear sunglasses. So that creates a problem. If you wear sunglasses and look down into the water, now that actually changes how far we can see in the lake. And that can skew our measurements. So do not wear sunglasses. Remember to pick the shady side of the boat. So this is for consistency, because what we have is that if you are On the other side, you can get glare and a lot of reflection, and that changes. So to be consistent, we have chosen you go on the shady side of the boat. Be consistent with your weather and timing. Please measure between 10 and 4. If you measure too early or too late, what you're having is the sun is now getting at such an angle that the light is coming in and reflecting off. And so this actually does impact our measurement. So try to measure between 10 and 4. Sunny, calm days are best, but not required. If it's cloudy, that's okay. You'll still be able to see the disk as it goes down. And do not measure during heavy boating. If any of you are on, if you're July 4th and there's tons of boats on the water, you may not want to measure Secchi disk depth at that afternoon because you are now measuring actually the impact of those boats, not the baseline condition of the lake. If that's just how it goes and you are in some abnormal condition, we do have unusual conditions that you can write about. It's a note that you can associate with that number on our data sheet. Some of you may live on shallow lakes that are clear. And so you go to the deepest part of the lake, you drop the Secchi disk in, and you notice it hits the ground, and you can still see it. So in that case, that is still good data. What you'll do is go onto the data sheet, you'll write down that Secchi number and say on the bottom, Secchi is on the bottom, because that still is indicating a measure. And through time, if Secchi disk starts to not hit the bottom, that's why it's great to still have that baseline Secchi reading. Also on these shallow lakes, you might lose the Secchi in the vegetation. So you can say that too. Like the deepest part of the lake might be where there's lots of aquatic plants. And so you might get down, you can see it, and then it hits like the close to the bottom and is lost in the plants. Please write that in your notes as well. So here is your data sheet. Please fill out everything that you see. So lake name, county and township, your field ID number, which is what I was mentioning is unique to your lake, latitude and longitude, and any volunteers who are helping you. It could be you or some other folks. And as you can see, what we fill out for you are these weekly dates. This doesn't mean you have to collect every single line, but if you collected May 14th, and then you collected May 29th, and then let's say you did June 6th, that's okay. You can put all of those in like that. Give us the time of day, Secchi depth to the nearest half foot, any weather conditions, and any unusual conditions. On the back side of the data sheet, although it seems kind of silly, we ask you to draw your lake as best as you can, or you can paste or tape a printed map to this and estimate where you collected your data. This is important because through time, there's a long-term monitoring program. And if data starts to become a little funny, we like to sometimes confirm that the data was collected in the right location. Or let's say something got screwed up and we just need to try to learn what is happening. We look to this map. So please do that. And then data entry. What we ask is that all volunteers are encouraged to use our entry system. And so on our website, you go to MiCorps.net and then data exchange. And let's see, do I have that? Oh, I do. Perfect. So here's our base website, MiCorps.net. Go to data exchange and then enter data right there. And so you can do this through time. So if you wanted to, after you collected on May 15th, you can enter that data and then it's instantly in our database. Or you can wait to the end of the season and put them all in at that point. And if you cannot enter the data in yourself, although we really encourage you to do so, you can send us, you have to send us a copy of your data sheet, either in the mail or by or electronic scan or picture. And then we will enter the data for you if you are not able to. But in order to be efficient, because we have hundreds of volunteers and hundreds of lakes, entering your own data is quite helpful. Accessing the data. So Joe showed where you can access our data. We have a couple locations. So first, if you go to hover over, so MiCorps.net, hover over lakes, you can go to individual lake reports. And then by county, you can find a summary report, the last summary report ever to be on your lake. Now, some of you, you're on lakes that have never been sampled, so that doesn't exist. But if you're a veteran volunteer or you know that others have been collecting data on your lake, you can go to this. All data ever is found in the data exchange, and you hover over data exchange and click view data, and then you can access all the data that you wish for any lake within that has ever collected in our system. So for all of you that are enrolled this year, you will receive a summary data report in early 2025. In that report, we cover a variety of items. We show you, like, for example, this lake, Corey Lake, collected in 2022 17 measurements of water clarity. The minimum was 13, the maximum was 26. The average was 17. We also give standard deviation, and we calculate that into trophic status. Remember the oligotrophic, mesotrophic, eutrophic. We also, this lake has collected data through time. So we actually look at the 5 years before that and then the years before that. And so we can compare actual numbers, and we can compare all of this to your to all CLMP lakes in case you want to compare to others. And then, of course, as a long-term monitoring program, we like to show figures through time. And so this is the average Secchi, each dot is through time. And as you can see, this lake is very stable with some wiggling, which is what we would predict based off of climatic factors. Here's what you will see with our trophic status. So you'll see that this lake has summer total phosphorus of 30, and then you get on this sort of scale and you'd say, oh, 30, that is oligotrophic. And then as you can see, we show data through time, which again is the value of our program, one of the values. Here's an example of a lake that collected in the late 70s, early 80s, didn't collect anything until once again in the 2000s, but how valuable, again, like decades prior, now we can say, wow, water clarity used to be higher in this lake compared to what it is today. And that is very valuable. So there's our Secchi disk water transparency. Are there any questions?
Hi, Eric. Good job. We had a couple of questions that came in, but I think we covered all of them. We provided some links in the chat to some of the resources you mentioned, like Navionics, DNR's Inland Lake Maps, some of the sites on our webpage. I did have a question come in from Greg just now saying Brighton Lake has 2 numbers. Eric, I'm guessing that has to do with having multiple field eye days on a single lake. Did you want to say something about
Sure,
that?
yeah. And so some lakes in our program have historically, when they first were added, had multiple sampling stations. You think of the main site will always be, well, I'll say mostly will always be the deepest location on your lake. And then in the past in our program, we have had other sites available for monitoring on certain lakes. We our policies have changed a bit, and so that's we likely will not do that anymore. But if you have any questions about that, so on Brighton Lake, for example, you'll have that main site, which is the deepest, and in the past, it had other sampling stations that were part of our program, and that's why you'll see data for the same lake
Thanks,
for
Eric.
some
While
years.
you were talking, I took a quick look at our database, and one of the numbers that's listed for Brighton has barely ever been used, and the other one was always used. So
Yep,
I responded in the chat to Greg with the number that would be this number he should use.
thank you.
Sure. That's the only questions for now. We're actually on a break, and we'll leave this agenda up. So if anyone comes and goes, they can see where we're at in the agenda. But we'll stick around here. You know, folks, if you want to take a break and get some coffee or take a little break and come back at 10:15, Eric will be presenting on spring and summer phosphorus. But we'll be here to answer any questions you might have during the break as well. A question just came in. Can I do this measuring from a kayak? And if you must is kind of our answer on that. What we know, if you're on a shallow lake and it's a really calm day, you may be able to get your kayak to stay put long enough to collect a data like Secchi data from your kayak. But the problem is if you're not anchored, and most kayaks don't have an anchor, maybe I shouldn't assume, maybe you have a little anchor for your kayak to hold yourself in place. Otherwise, if your boat starts to drift, the line of your kayak or your Secchi disc will also start to go on an angle instead of being straight up and down. And so your readings will not be accurate. So really, if you can have a boat that anchors, that's what you really should do ideally.
Yes, we have had lakes that are 500 acres, and a slight breeze can push you off of your spot pretty easily.